started. Perhaps before I do my welcome, I'm going to invite my colleague on the San Diego Regional Interfaith Collaborative Board, Margie Carroll, to offer a word of prayer and blessing to begin today's proceedings.
Loving God of us all, we gather together today to remember those who are affected by family violence and for whom we are greatly concerned, especially during this challenging pandemic. We pray for the many adults who feel confused, abused, and trapped in a relationship. We ask that you would help them seek and find healthy ways to work through their frustrations and destructive impulses, which also harm the children in their midst. Inspire each of us as faith leaders, professionals, neighbors, or family members to know the urgency of your call to address the many needs of those in abusive situations. Give us the fortitude to listen well to one another this morning and respond to the challenge before us. Let us leave this gathering not only more informed, but willing to make a positive difference about domestic violence in whatever ways we can. Give us the courage to not only share our convictions and our compassion, but the wisdom to plant seeds that encourage others to think, ponder, and act with us to help resolve this serious issue in our community. Loving God, watch over all of us with your care, those who are being violated, and all of us who are striving to assist as we serve in your name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Margie. My name is Daniel Orth. I'm the president of the San Diego Regional Interfaith Collaborative Board, and on behalf of all of the board, please allow me to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really happy to have your presence here, your wisdom, your experience, your neighborliness, as Margie offered in her prayer. All of us have a role in today's topic. If you're not familiar with the San Diego Regional Interfaith Collaborative, I like to think that we have kind of a tripartite mission to inform our San Diego community about the most pressing issues and challenges that we're experiencing as a county, to inspire action, to encourage people to get out and do something about that, and to also support collaboration and connections across communities, congregations, people, neighborhoods, neighbors, so that working together we can work on addressing the major challenges that we're facing. Certainly today's topic is one that I think all of us who are here this morning already know the deep significance of. On the SDRIC board, we would share articles nearly every week that unfortunately highlighted how prescient and pressing this issue is. Incidents of domestic violence across San Diego County. And of course, those are only the ones that actually make the news and get reported on, knowing that there's no doubt hundreds of others that are taking place that will never, reach anyone's awareness. Even just this week on Monday, an unfortunate and tragic incident involving domestic violence in Escondido, and a suicide and a survivor and a police officer shot. And so the importance of today's topic, I think, could not be overstressed. So we're very fortunate today to have a number of experts with us who are going to be able to share with us their experience, their wisdom. We'll have two keynote addresses, first by Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, and then by Assistant District Attorney Claudia Grasso. And my colleagues on the board will introduce both of them in turn here momentarily, but we'll certainly be happy to benefit from their experience. Following their two presentations, we'll have an opportunity to engage in some question and answer with them. So as you have questions, please feel free to jot them down. After the presentations, we'll ask you to submit those questions via the chat feature, and my colleague, Reverend Sharon, will be working on facilitating that question and answer for us. And then following that, we'll have a chance to go into some breakout groups where we've got 5 organizations from across San Diego County who work on the question of family violence, supporting survivors, and we'll have an opportunity to engage with them more deeply about their work and talk about opportunities for all of us to get involved in supporting them in their initiatives. And then finally, we'll come back together to debrief a little bit and talk about what's next. As I mentioned, one of our goals for the San Diego Regional Interfaith Collaborative is to support and encourage collaboration and inspire action. And we really want to start knowing more about what are the actions that are coming out of our gatherings. We have these gatherings twice a year, and we know that many people are taking steps, whether it's preaching a sermon the following week or the next month, or connecting with another religious institution in their area. We know that these actions are happening, and we really want to start doing a better job of supporting you all and documenting what's happening to address these issues as they emerge from our gatherings that take place. So again, let me say thank you so much for being here. We're very happy to have you. And we hope that today's event will be an inspiration and an education and also an opportunity to connect. We already had some connections with old friends earlier this morning, but connect with some new friends too, hopefully, and learn about some new initiatives that are taking place. So to welcome and introduce our first keynote speaker today, I'd like to turn things over to Reverend Sharon Wiley.
Okay, good morning. Again, welcome to folks. I'm so delighted to welcome this morning one of our keynote speakers, Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. She is a theologian, educator, social activist, minister, and musician. She is an ordained United Methodist minister who holds dual ministerial fellowship with the Unitarian Universalist Association. And she served as president of Starr King School for the Ministry for 25 years. Now she is professor of theology emerita and president emerita there. And she's the theologian and author and co-author of multiple books, including co-authored with Rita Nakashima Brock, her book, Proverbs of Ashes, Redemptive Violence and the Search for What Saves Us. And it's her work there that particularly excited us to invite her to speak for us today. So I invite you to join me in welcoming her. And I'll also say for her, I know she's experiencing some noise where she is that we may hear during her talk. And so I invite us all to try and draw on our patience and to be able to hear, take it as a spiritual lesson to hear what is meaningful for us and to let go of the part that is not so meaningful for us. So welcome, Dr. Parker. You can give me a moment. Go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon, for that welcome. And it's great to be with all of you today. I'm honored to make a contribution to the wonderful work that the San Diego Regional Interfaith Collaborative is doing. We're living in a time where multi-religious cooperation and collaboration is an important sign of the possibilities of strengthening our communities in the midst of all of our differences and working together for the common good. So thank you for the wonderful work you are doing and for including me today. Our topic, family violence, a pandemic within a pandemic, as Daniel said in his introduction, is a critical one right now. We know that during COVID-19, the incidence of calls for help for domestic violence have gone up. One report says that though 9/11 calls have been down in general, domestic violence calls have been up 20-25%. Some people say 50% up. One hospital in Massachusetts reported that since the start of the pandemic, nearly all of their emergency room visits from women, except those related to COVID, were due to domestic violence incidents. So just a few more examples of how much it matters that we address this topic. And we also know not only are incidents of domestic violence perhaps on the increase right now, that it is also more difficult for people to seek help. The pandemic complexifies the help when shelters and hospitals or churches may expose one to COVID. it may be harder to choose to leave a violent situation to go to a place of safety. We know that children who are isolated at home and not in school or other activities are out of the eyesight of those helpers and healers, teachers, counselors, and others who otherwise might be observing the signs of physical or emotional abuse. So that increases their risk. We know that abusers abuse to assert power and control, and that all of us are feeling less in control with the uncertainties of COVID, with unemployment or job loss. So this loss of control may be an escalating factor for some abusers. And we also know that racism and discrimination against LGBTQ people and immigrants make these communities and populations even more at risk. So they experience a pandemic within a pandemic within a pandemic. So for all these reasons, as people of faith, our hearts are moved, our minds and our hands are things we want to put to use in helping and doing what we can. Religion can be a pathway for healing and help for those experiencing domestic violence. It also, unfortunately, can be a roadblock to healing and help. And as faith leaders, we need to pay attention to how religion functions as a roadblock that can make abuse worse, can trap people in abusive situations, and those things that allow religion to be a true wellspring of healing, help, and support. So for my part today, I want to ask us to pay attention, to delve into and reflect on how religion can be a roadblock and how it can be a pathway. And in our diverse religious traditions, whether we're Buddhists or Christians or Muslims or Jews or Indigenous or pagan or Unitarian Universalist, the specific application of what I have to say is something you yourself may need to work on. I am most familiar as a Christian theologian, and so I come from that perspective, but my own multi-religious work has taught me that in all of our traditions and communities, religion can be a roadblock or a pathway. And I invite us all to think about that. So I'd like to tell a story from early in my experience as a young minister that has shaped my whole understanding over many years about domestic violence. One afternoon, I was in my study, and a knock came on the study door. When I opened the door, a woman who wasn't from our congregation was there. She had sad brown eyes and looked weary, and she introduced herself. I'm Lucia. She said, I live in the neighborhood and I walk by your church and I see on the church sign that you are a woman priest. That's what she called me. And maybe because you are a woman, you will understand my problem and can help me. So I invited her in, hoping I could be of some help. She said, my problem is my husband. Mostly he's a good man, but sometimes he hits me. One time he broke my arm, but at the hospital, I was too ashamed to tell them how my arm had gotten broken. I went to my priest 20 years ago at Sacred Heart and asked him what I should do. And he told me that I should rejoice in my sufferings, that they brought me closer to Jesus, and that if I loved my husband, I would bear these, his hitting me, I would bear it, this abuse, the way Jesus bore the cross out of love for us. And that in this way, I would grow closer to God. Then she looked me right in the eye and she said, I've been following my priest's advice for all these years, but now he's going after the children. And what I want to know is what the priest told me true? So in that moment, For a moment, I could not speak. My mouth felt like it was full of cotton. I knew how I should answer Lucia's question, but I was aware that just that past Sunday, though I was a liberal Christian and wouldn't have preached that Jesus' suffering and torture on the cross was a sign of love, I had just preached that last sermon, that last Sunday, a sermon about love. And I said, love endures all things, bears all things. Love thinks only for the well-being of the other and gives no thought to the self. Love keeps relationships and holds and never breaks relationships, no matter what it costs. And I realized that if I was going to answer Lucia's question the way I knew I needed to, I was going to have to rethink my theology, what I was preaching. And not only that, but choices I was making in my own life based on what I thought a faithful, loving Christian would do. So all that went through my head. And then finally, I found my voice and I said to Lucia, what the priest told you is not true. God does not want you to suffer and to be hurt in your home. God does not want your children to be beaten and injured by their father. God wants you to have abundant life and be free from violence, and your children as well. When she heard this, Lucia's sad face broke into a big, sunny smile. And she said, I knew I was right, but it helps to hear you say so. Now, I'll tell you some more about Lucia's story before I finish my talk this morning. But I want to pause here and notice how many lessons can be drawn from this experience, this story. First one is, for those of us who are religious leaders, and let me just make sure I'm following my notes here. The words we say, the teachings we offer matter. What we say in our sermons, what we sing in our songs, offer in our prayers, enact in our rituals, teach in our pastoral counseling, in all those settings, the way we represent our faith tradition is used by people who are experiencing violation, humiliation, and abuse and oppression to interpret their experience and find a way to respond or make choices. If our religious teachings give people the sense that, or even directly tell them, as Lucia was told, that we should bear abuse, that love is willing to suffer anything without breaking relationships, if our teachings are doing this, then we are, through our religion and our leadership, presenting roadblocks to people who are being violated in their home, women and children, and also men are sometimes the victims of violence. Same-sex couples can be places of intimate violence. So we are placing roadblocks for people. I've told this story about Lucia many times, and whenever there's an audience in which there are people who have worked in domestic violence shelters or as social workers with women, I hear again how often it is devout women who have the hardest time seeking help and who have to grapple with their religious ideas in order to make choices to do what they can for themselves and their children, to move out of violent situations and protect their lives. And I learned this even more painfully with another experience I had early in my ministry as a young woman serving a congregation in the Northwest. One of my clergy sisters, Pat, was serving a very small church in a town in a rural area, in a very small town. There were no social services for women or for domestic violence within about 50 miles. So she made the parsonage a shelter for abused women and let it be known in the community. And women who needed a place to go to get away from being injured would come and stay at the parsonage for a time. And she'd support them and work with them and encourage them. One of the women who came to her for shelter was named Enola Reed. And eventually Enola felt that it was her Christian duty to go back home. She was a very committed Lutheran, and she believed strongly that her role as a woman was to keep the family together. And so she went back to her abusive husband, and in front of their 3 children, he stabbed her to death one night. So women sometimes, in an effort to be faithful to their religious views, expose themselves to risking their very lives. And as religious leaders, we need to know how much our teachings matter and what kind of impact they can have. Second lesson then that draws from this one, as faith leaders, we have to be willing to critically examine our own tradition and our own teachings. And I think we need to use the interpretive questioning principle of asking for anything we preach or teach or pray or sing, what message will this send to a person who is experiencing domestic violence, being battered or incested, or in some way in their home, suffering? What will the message be? And what will it be for those who are abusing? Will it tell those who are abusing that what they're doing is okay, it's like what God does? Or will it tell abusers that there's help for them, but they have to change their ways? So we should ask that we should ask that of all that we teach, of our whole faith tradition. The third lesson I would take from this is that if we critically examine whether what our tradition is teaching is a roadblock or a pathway for healing, we ourselves may have to change. I had to change choices I was making, ways I was understanding my Christian faith and life because of my work with domestic violence victims and survivors. So be open to being changed by your pastoral commitment to those who are suffering violation. So let me take some moments and just name some of the religious teachings that I have learned we need to examine. And I'll name them and they'll be familiar to you, and we don't have time to unpack all of them in detail, but I hope this will spark your thinking. One of the most obvious ones is the teaching that men are ordained by God to rule over women, and that God has ordained women's role to be obedient and submissive and to be silent. Abusers use this theology to justify exerting power and control over women and children. And victims of abuse can blame themselves for being battered as having failed to be obedient, as having been too willful or said too much, not been silent enough, submissive enough. So the cycle of abuse continues. All the world's major religions have this patriarchal bias, and which we have learned to say is cultural and social more than religious. And we need to separate our faith from it. For Christians and Jews, one of the tools we have is to look carefully at the Genesis story. That when God proclaims that men are to rule over women, it is a sign of life outside of the garden, life alienated or separated from God. In the paradise garden, in life as God has intended it to be, women and men are not in a dominant and submissive relationship, but are in a relationship of equality. So God's purpose is equality, mutual help, respect, support, not dominance and submission. That's the state of sin. Another teaching of many of our faith traditions is that woman's role is to maintain peace in the home, to be the angel of the house who keeps everyone together and keeps things peaceful and happy. This is what Enola Reed believed. It's a strong teaching in Orthodox Judaism about women's roles. And while there's much that's beautiful about this, it can lead peace in the home to be a one-sided responsibility, the responsibility of the woman in the home. And that if there is not peace, even if it is the husband who's disturbing the peace, it is the woman's responsibility. So she may feel blamed and shamed, and abusers again can use this. It's your role to keep peace in the home, to exercise power and control over even the tiniest things, like whether the meat is cooked right at dinner time. So this control can become extremely oppressive when women are held responsible for all the peace in the home. Another thing that's very prevalent in our theistic traditions is the imagining of God as male. As Mary Daly said, an early feminist philosopher over 50 years ago, if God is male, males are God. And so that men can associate themselves with the divine. And the corollary teaching often is that women are imperfect men, are less than fully human, and have to be controlled and managed by men. Some of you know the wonderful book, The Color Purple by Alice Walker. In it, the character Shug is trying to tell Celie, who is a survivor of abuse, to be open to the possibility of seeing God and finding God, because Celie has given up on God. She's been so hurt. And Shug says, when I learned that God was white and a male, I lost interest. All the men's I know are low down and mean. I had to get men off my eyeball before I could see God. That's a paraphrase. So another teaching related to this about gender is that God has created human beings, male and female, and ordained heterosexual marriage as a sign of God's love. This teaching, again, has much that's beautiful about it, but it isolates those who do not conform to gender norms. So same-sex couples, transgender people, or even elders who have been widowed and no longer and are alone or are dependent on living with a family, but are no longer in a marriage. All these folks and these identities can be viewed as outside of God's plan or God's will or God's purpose for our lives. So that makes them more vulnerable to as targets of abuse and control. Then there's the teaching that children are born sinful with original sin. I'm aware of religious education materials for young children where teachers are told to view, this is in some Christian evangelical materials, teachers are to view children as who are willful or disobedient, or don't behave with a lot of self-control, that these characteristics are signs of the sinfulness of the child, that the devil is in them. And the purpose of religious education is to get the devil out of the child, so that beating children is seen as a way to redeem them from their sin or controlling them. So spare the rod, spoil the child. And many abusers see themselves as carrying out a divine imperative to save their children from their sin. That's a heartbreaking implication of that teaching. Then there's another corollary to that then, and that is the idea that God uses violence to punish evildoers or sinners, and also uses violence to redeem or save sinners. This is, in this theological framework, God threatens hell and offers the reward of heaven. And the threat of hell in some theological frameworks is released from, lifted from human beings because of Jesus' atoning death on the cross. And God the Father, in this narrative theology, sent Jesus to the world to fulfill his Father's will, that he suffer and die on the cross. And in this way, bear the punishment that all humanity deserves for its sin. And those who believe in him and receive his grace are freed from the threat of violence, of eternal damnation, are saved. Some of the women theologians I've worked with and womanist theologians, as we have grappled with how our Christian and Jewish traditions, this one is a Christian idea, have impacted domestic abuse victims, we have called this theological framework divine child abuse. Because the virtue of Jesus in this narrative is that he submitted to his Father's will that he be humiliated, tortured, and killed. Now, this is then taught as a sign of God's love and of Jesus' love. This is the theology behind what kept Lucia for 20 years in an abusive situation, because her priest told her she should be like Jesus. She should accept abuse, that it was redemptive, that it was loving. I learned some more from another story, dear friend of mine who I'll call Elizabeth, about how this teaching can impact children. Elizabeth was a seminary classmate of mine. She became a wonderful Methodist minister, a loving, serving person. But she came through a harrowing childhood. Beginning when she was about 6, her father sexually abused her, and until she left home. Her father was a leader in the community, a member of the state legislature, the high school guidance counselor, and a leader in their church. And when he was raping his own child, he would tell her that God approved of what he was doing, that he and God were like this, but that if she told his secret to anyone, he would kill himself. So Elizabeth said, I lived to go to church on Sunday because at church, I heard about the sufferings of Jesus, about how his Father asked him to drink the cup of suffering and how he died on the cross, and everyone sang his praises and adored Jesus, and Jesus' suffering gave people life. So I believed that my pain and violation was keeping my Father alive and was praiseworthy. And that's how I endured. So what I see in this and know from this is that her Christian community gave Elizabeth some comfort, some way to endure, but it did not give her any resources for affirming her sacred worth and dignity, her right to be free from such abuse. And it didn't give any indication that what her father was doing was wrong. It was like what God does. So this can be a very disturbing thing to have to reflect on for those who believe this theological framework, but it's an important one to grapple with. And the final one I'll mention is the idea that abused persons should forgive their abusers. And this one is an okay message, but not without the message that forgiveness is only appropriate when there has been repentance and repair. So just to tell people, forgive the abuser, he doesn't know what he's doing, have compassion on him, have mercy on him, will not serve to transform the situation and bring about something better for the abuser and something better for the victim. So just quickly, there are many positive alternatives to these teachings that we can lift up. Proclaim that all people are of sacred worth, of inherent value, that all are created in the image of God. Proclaim equality before God, and that freedom and equality are God's desire for us. Teach that God is larger than any of our human categories, and use a whole array of metaphors, not just that God is like a man, or God is like a warrior, like a king, but God is like a loving mother, like a sheltering tree, like a rock, like a wind. And remember the wisdom of the Jewish tradition that God's name ultimately cannot be spoken, that our ways of imagining God can too easily become idolatrous and can cause harm. So keep our notions of the divine fluid, open, diverse, and affirmative of many expressions of human life. Proclaim God's promise of abundant life for all of us. The prophetic Jewish teachings and the Islamic teachings of, and the Christian teachings of abundant life, just life, sustainable life, ethical life, and the promises of protection from harm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. All of the things that promise to the oppressed that their burdens will be lifted, and that the religious community is there to assure the wholeness and freedom of all our lives. So here's the end of Lucia's story and the end of my talk. After Lucia smiled that big smile, she started working on a plan for how she could change her situation. She went back to school and got a skill that would allow her to get a job so that she could support herself and her children. And when she was ready, and with the support from me and others, she took the step of separating from her husband, going to work, taking care of her children, getting free from the oppressive situation, the violence. And then her husband went back to the priest and asked for help, and the priest understood that he had not given the right counsel, and began to work with her husband to face what he was doing and to get help for his controlling and angry ways of being. So in the end, Lucia said, my children got their father back and I got my life back. So it is possible for situations of domestic violence to be transformed, for people to get help. It can be a long process. It takes accompaniment, it takes care. And for those of us who are faith leaders, let us take our role seriously to teach and preach and give examples in our own lives of the liberating and healing power of God, and let go of those things that create roadblocks and burdens for those who are oppressed. Let us be joy bringers, not bringers of tears. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Reverend Dr. Parker, so much. It seems strange that people can't applaud at this moment. I feel like that powerful speech definitely deserves accolades. I guess we can clap on our screen, but thank you for that, and thank you for the challenge. I mean, I think that what's clear is that our faith traditions have so much power and so much possibility, and unfortunately that can be used for both good and bad. The power to do harm and really perpetuate these cycles and these systems and these situations, and also at the same time the power to very much positively lift people up and to help them and to resolve these situations. So it's a powerful challenge to all of us to think about how we're how we're using our positions to impact people. Thank you so much again. I'd like to turn things over to my colleague on the SDRIC board, Rosemary Johnston, to introduce our next speaker. Oh, Rosemary, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Thanks. Claudia Grasso has been a San Diego Deputy District Attorney for 18 years. She is the Assistant Chief of the Family Protection Division, which prosecutes cases of domestic violence, child physical and sexual abuse, elder abuse, internet crimes against children, and animal abuse. She has prosecuted and tried a variety of felony cases, including domestic violence and infanticide, child molest cases warranting life in prison, torture, attempted murder, elder abuse, and domestic violence. Additionally, Claudia serves as the San Diego Domestic Violence Council President, a collaborative of service providers, law enforcement, and healthcare workers whose goal is to eradicate domestic violence, provide service to domestic violence victims and survivors, and prevent domestic abuse in San Diego County via education. She's also the District Attorney's Office Coordinator of the Domestic Violence High Risk Team, which identifies domestic violence victims who are at risk for lethality and provide wraparound services. Being bilingual and bicultural, Claudia regularly does outreach to the Spanish media and community on domestic violence, sexual assault, and child molest, and has taught throughout the county on these topics. She received her Juris Doctorate from the University of San Diego Law School, an EDM from Harvard University Graduate School of Education, and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of California of Los Angeles. It's an honor to have her speak to us today, as it has been to have Reverend Dr. Parker. Claudia?
Thank you so much, Rosemary, and thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Parker. It's amazing that you truly do learn something every day. I have been working with domestic violence victims and in this world for 18 years, and I had never looked at it with the lens of Bible teachings and religious faith. It's just something that something that makes sense to me now after hearing you speak. Thank you so much. As Rosemary said, I am actually now the interim chief of the Family Protection Division of the District Attorney's Office. I have been a prosecutor for 18 years, and most of those years I have been prosecuting cases of domestic violence. I'm also the president of the Domestic Violence Council, and as you know, my life is working with victims and hoping to eradicate domestic violence via prevention and teaching like this. Why am I so passionate? I grew up in a Mexican family in East Los Angeles in the 70s and the 80s. And anybody who is familiar with East Los Angeles knows that it's a very, very poor, or at least when I grew up, a very poor community. We grew up very poor, gang infested. It was a lot of violence, but I must say that I grew up with a lot of love. I had not only my immediate family, but my extended family that lived there. One aspect, though, of my childhood was the reality of domestic abuse. And you'll hear me use domestic abuse and domestic violence interchangeably because, and the reason is domestic violence is one facet of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse can be physical, emotional, psychological, financial. There are so many facets of abuse. And so the umbrella is domestic abuse, and violence is one aspect of it. So back to my family. We are a big Mexican family, a lot of love, but very male dominated. And there was domestic abuse going on in my extended family. And we knew about it. Everybody knew about it. And it was excused. I grew up with having aunts tell other aunts, just come on, just make his dinner a lot earlier, or just, don't egg him on, or you know how he gets. And And everyone knew this reality. Us kids grew up knowing that this was going on, but it was life. That it was just life. You never reported it. You never told anybody outside of the family what happened. It's just something that happened within the family, and it was pretty much either not talked about or swept under the rug or excused. And once being a bit removed from that, I realized, wait a minute, why? And it was all, it was male perpetrators on females. But as Dr. Parker said, domestic abuse can be same sex, can be females, female perpetrators on male victims. But the majority, when I grew up, it was male perpetrators on female victims. And so looking back and thinking, my gosh, it doesn't have to be this way. And the reality is, when I am in our Latino communities and I speak to victims, the mentality is still old school, as I call it. Some victims, still feel that they have to mind their husbands, ask permissions for, from their husbands. And it's not just the Mexican Latino community, it's many cultural communities out there, as my colleagues who are in, work with these victims know. And so that is why I'm here, because it's personal. It's something that I'd like to change. It's something that I'd like to educate. It's something that we want to work together to help victims. Now, it's a problem in San Diego. In 2019, there were over 17,000 calls for service. And that means 911 calls related to domestic violence. 15 domestic violence related homicides. And now we're in COVID. 2020, COVID hit. We're still gathering statistics, but from what we can see so far, there was a 3% increase of cases submitted to the DA's office. However, our office, our collaborative fear of all those cases that have gone unreported. What is the phenomenon happening right now during COVID? Many have lost their jobs or are working from home. Many of our children are being educated at home via a computer. Parents have had to shoulder that education because it's just not working with the video Zoom or whatever platform. The mandated reporters that usually kept a watch on our children are coaches. There's no sports going on. Our teachers, our after school care, all of those that kind of kept an eye out for our children, eye out for our victims, are not having that contact. And so victims of domestic abuse are barricaded with their abusers who are watching what they're doing. They're not leaving the homes. They're monitoring phones. They don't have those outlets as taking the kids to school, going to work. Now with the phenomena also that everything can get delivered, right? You don't even have to go to the market. You don't even have to go to Target anymore. And so our victims are truly, and again, our churches are closed. Thank God that we're now opening a little bit more. But again, all those places where our victims traditionally get help were closed for so long. And so we have our victims that are barricaded with their abusers. And you throw alcohol in the mix, you throw drug use in the mix, because those are two coping mechanisms for our reality, and we get trouble. What we are hearing from our community partners and from 911 dispatch and from our rabies doctors is that the severity of the injuries has markedly increased. So the babies, the kids that our rabies doctors are seeing in the ER are definitely more dangerous, more imminent, more definitely the injuries are more profound than before. The victims that are calling finally for help on the hotlines, the calls are more urgent. There are more just severe in their nature. So the largest obstacle during COVID has been, how do we get resources to victims? If they're barricaded with their abusers, how can all of us reach our victims? And it's been through platforms like this, through education, through grassroots efforts, being in the trenches, connecting. How are you doing today? Just trying to let people know that we are still here. Services may look different, but we are still here. I also want to touch upon the reality that happens with our immigrant and refugee victims as well. So they already start off with barriers. They don't speak the language many times. They are not acclimated to the culture. They don't know how to navigate the system. And so perpetrators use this to exert their power and control. We see this day in and day out. If you call police, you're just going to get deported. If you call police, you're undocumented, so you'll never see your children again. And they use this lack of documentation, this lack of just the ability to navigate the system as power and control to keep them silent. So what is our response? What do we do? Again, it's platforms like this. The Domestic Violence Council, we're so fortunate and blessed to have a committee called the Binational Committee that addresses domestic violence within the immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker community. And for example, next month, we're going to be hosting a general meeting in the DV Council that addresses working with Latino community. And we're going to bring an immigration attorney that's going to talk about what's the realities, of immigration. Will you get deported? No. For calling the police? No. Things like that to get the message out. We're also having the first ever DV Essentials all in Spanish. We traditionally have an all-day, DV Essentials education with various perspectives on domestic violence. And this is the first time that we're going to do it all in Spanish to invite our community partners, but also our victims, not only in San Diego, but in our border towns in Mexico, in Tijuana and Mexicali, where we're seeing a lot of this increase again in domestic violence. I also have to give a shout out to our partners, License to Freedom, who are community-based in East County, who have done an amazing job as well, working with Middle Eastern community. Again, many of these are refugees that are coming to our country, not really realizing, how to navigate the system, what to do. So they help not only the victims, but perpetrators as well with education, with these are our laws. This is how you navigate them. You don't hit your spouse. You don't hit your children, and teaching them new ways to walk away when they're frustrated and coping with stressors. So what are the red flags and the warning flags? It's not always easy to tell that when a relationship is going to become abusive. As all of you who have been in a relationship, in the beginning, everything is wonderful. You get those butterflies in your stomach, you're just happy, you're happy to be with that partner. And many perpetrators, many abusers are perfectly, they seem normal in the beginning stages of a relationship. And we noticed that the possessive, the control starts very subtly. It doesn't appear just overnight out of nowhere. It just kind of takes root. And every relationship is different. However, a common thread is this power and control, which can take form in physical violence, emotional, psychological, financial abuse. So what are some of the red flags? Showing jealousy and possessiveness masqueraded with, I love you so much, I just want to keep you to myself. I don't want you to go to your friends just because I just love you so much and I want to be with you all the time. Don't go with your family because I want you to be with me. Control of money and job and education. Again, be masqueraded with love, with saying, you know what, you don't have to work, you don't have to go to school. I will take care of you. I will give you money. I will help you. And that's how it starts. The threatening, the looks, the stares that the victim is very well aware of, preventing a victim from making their own decisions. And that's one thing that not only do we work with victims in the DV Council, but we work with who we call survivors, because many times our victims come out of this situation. They're finally safe, but now what, right? Many times they don't have a skill, they need to work, but decisions were always made for them. So now they have to learn to be assertive. They have to learn to stand on their 2 feet and start making decisions for themselves and for their children. And we have a wonderful program, it's called Leap to Success, that offers these classes of assertiveness and empowerment for victims to become these survivors and be able to move on. Another red flag is, accusing the victim of being a bad parent or threatening to take the children away. Destroying property, threatening to hurt and kill pets. My division in the DA's office just recently started prosecuting animal abuse. Why? Because we saw the common thread of domestic violence and animal abuse. That is a way to control a victim, by threatening to harm their beloved pets, or sometimes kill the beloved pets. That is, they retain that power and that control. There's intimidation with guns and knives and weapons, pressuring to have sex when the victim doesn't want to, pressuring to use drugs and alcohol. Those are red flags in a relationship for a victim. However, how can we tell, right, if someone's a victim? And many times you cannot, but there are certain things that we have seen. For example, the obvious is, seeing our victims completely covered head to toe in clothing. It's a hot 80-degree day, but yet they're wearing long sleeves, dark sunglasses at night. That could be a sign. Having to ask their permission of their partner for every move. Oh, I do want to join this meeting. I just have to ask, my husband if it's okay. Or I have to check if this is okay if I go here with you. Making excuses when the abuser gets a little out of control. They have too much to drink at a party and become abusive, or become verbally, out of control, and saying, oh, they're just under a lot of stress. It's just, they have so much on their plate right now. He normally, or she normally, is not like this. Also the eyes, you can tell expression, when you look at someone and they're speaking to you, but yet their eyes keep shifting to their partner to seek approval. Or nervous kids who are trying to be kids, but keep looking at a certain parent to make sure that they're doing the right thing. Those can all be signs that something is going on. So what do we do? Safety plan. First and foremost is, not all victims are ready to leave an abusive relationship. And while that can be very frustrating for us trying to help a victim, the best we can do is listen without judgment. We cannot tell a victim, oh, you should just leave your partner. Why are you still with him? Why are you still with her? That's not the way it works. You're going to alienate that victim, and she will not, or he will not, want to speak to you if they feel that they are being judged. So there's many factors why a victim is just not ready to leave. It could be financial. It could be who's going to take care of the kids. It could be they love their partner. Simple as that. So what can we do? If there is a victim that's just not ready to leave, offer them safety tips. They have to come up with a safety plan just to keep them safe, to make sure that they are safe. So what are some safety things that they can do? Identify areas in the house where there are no weapons, because if a situation were to escalate and become violent, they could run to that area and there are no weapons around. During an argument or violence, don't run towards the children, because you don't want your children to get caught up in the violence. If possible, always wear clothing with pockets, because you can always store a cell phone in a pocket should you need to call for help right away. Develop a safety word. Some people call it a code word that you teach your children. You teach neighbors, family, friends, that if you utter this safety word, it is code for call 911 right away, I am in danger. Teach your children how to call for help, how to dial 911, and what to say. If a victim has their own car, keep a packed bag in the trunk where you can keep clothing and cash and copies of identification in case you have to leave right away. Make sure there's always gas in that tank. Don't wear anything around your neck that can be used for strangulation. Once a victim is strangled, statistics show that she or he is 700% more likely to be killed. Strangulation is taking it to the next level. It's a very personal form of violence. So we ask, don't wear necklaces, scarves, anything that can be used to strangle. Call 911, obviously, if there's an emergency. But a good place, a good reference to start for resources is the domestic violence hotline, the national hotline that when you call, they then transfer you to localized services. And that number is 1-800-799-7233. And it's a wonderful place to start. Now, what if the victim is ready to leave? Statistics show that the most dangerous time in a relationship is when a victim is ready to leave. Most of the DV homicides that I have prosecuted have occurred when the victim had decided to leave the relationship and either obtain a restraining order or was in the process of leaving when they got killed. It's a very dangerous time. So what can we do? First and foremost is safety. Safety has to be the primary concern. I emailed Rosemary the most up-to-date comprehensive guide of resources existing in San Diego, and she can definitely share it with all of you. There you will find one of the things that we're so proud of this year in the collaborative in the DA's office is that we formed the Southern California Safe Shelter Collaborative. Prior, victims had to call 5 different places. Is there a bed available for shelter? No. Is there a bed with children? No. Finally, our shelters combined forces, as I call them, into one central portal. So victims only have to call one place and there will be directed to a shelter where they can go immediately. But you will see on this resource guide help and directives to get restraining orders, medical assistance, legal assistance, shelter, food, clothing, transportation. We even have a little shelter for pets. So if a domestic violence victim were to flee with their, beloved puppy, there is a place where the puppy can go because shelters don't always take pets. But that puppy will be safe in this shelter. In this pet shelter. Meanwhile, the victim can get back on his or her feet. So those are the things that we can do to help each other out. For more information, please just Google San Diego Domestic Violence Council. We have all of our up-to-date trainings and guides. Everything is on that website. Also, the DA's office has developed an amazing website during COVID. It's www.preventdv.org. dv1.org. There again, there's a lot of resources listed there. There's even a self-test the victims can take to see where they rank in the danger in their relationship. There are also a site for perpetrators on just giving them tips. If you get to that boiling point, what do you do? How can you just walk away? What are coping mechanisms? Because again, many of these families that we prosecute, they end up together. So we are shifting how we look at families in that we are not out to, some perpetrators need to go to prison just because of the severity of what they do. But some do not, we're not here to lock them up and throw away the key. It's what can we teach you? What mechanisms can we teach you? So someday perhaps this family can be salvaged and go back and be loving without violence. And so there are tips and safety plans on that too. And of course, I'm always here. If there's anything you need, Rosemary has my email, but it's claudia.grasso, as you see my name up there, at SDCDA, the acronym for San Diego County DA.org. Definitely, I work with wonderful, wonderful partners, as will be speaking in the breakout rooms. I recognize, Alberta Saavedra from North County Lifeline and others that are just a wonderful and amazing resources to help victims. And thank you so much for what you do and for having me here and for getting the word out. I am indebted. And please don't hesitate to call on me.
Claudia, thank you so much for that wonderful information. And again, I want to thank both Claudia and Rebecca for bringing such rich thoughts, really meaty things from sort of two different ways of thinking, things that we can bring back to our religious communities. We don't have a lot of time for Q&A, but we have a few minutes. If anyone has a question they'd like to post in the chat, hopefully you saw in the chat, we do have lots of resources for you that we're going to send in an email. Hopefully this afternoon, we can get them up on our website quickly. One of those is a graphic that Dr. Parker brought that we didn't have time for, but it's called the Faith Leaders Wheel. And it's a graphic, it's specifically designed for faith leaders to think about what you can offer in your religious community. And then I know we have those, the local resources that Claudia was just referring to. So lots of things for you to dig into after this time together. So does anyone have a question for Rebecca or Claudia? Claudia, I know we have lots of gratitude for the things we've heard. I wonder if Rebecca has anything you want to say after having heard some. I wonder if you have thoughts after listening to some of Claudia, and or specifically want to invite Claudia if you have anything you want to say more in response to some of Rebecca's sharing. We didn't create space for dialogue or much interaction, so I want to invite that if you'd like it. And it's okay if you don't. Oh, I think Rebecca, there you go.
I just want to say thank you for Claudia's wonderful presentation. And there are incredible resources available now in a way that there weren't when I first started in ministry. And one of the things every faith leader can do is to become acquainted with those resources, and so that you can learn from them and connect to them. So that's going to happen today. And yes, the Faith Leaders Wheel will also help summarize a lot of what I had to say in terms of what you yourself can do as a faith leader. So I don't have a lot more to add except to say it's so important, and thank you everyone for everything that you're trying to do, committed to doing.
So a question, I think for Claudia, sometimes victims live in multi-generational families, often perhaps the abuser's parents' home. And how can we reach, or what kind of support do we have for victims in that complicated situation?
Absolutely. And we see this often where perpetrators' parents see what is going on, and we have police intervention. And of course, they protect their son or daughter and, you know, pretend to turn a blind eye, or maybe say, you know, we didn't see anything, when they very well know what is going on. But again, it's intervention. It's offering help. It's a tough situation. It's a tough situation because for many of us, family is everything. And as we spoke about, you know, in the religious context, which again, thank you so much, Dr. Parker, that I didn't think about. It's just, you don't leave a family. And that's the same thing with, you know, what I've heard in the Middle Eastern culture and the Latino culture is that you don't break up a family. So you make it work no matter what, you know, type thing. And we do see many victims, well, a good number of victims that get pressures, not only from husband or partner's parents, but their own parents. You know, you don't walk away because, and many times domestic violence has been generational. And when they say that there's a cycle that happens and it is generational, I am the first to say that it just breaks my heart that some of the victims that I worked with when I was a young prosecutor and their children, I am now seeing those children are victims and perpetrators of domestic violence. Those same kids, it's happening. The cycle happens, and it's true. It's very much alive. So I'm a firm believer of intervention, showing them that there is another way, that you don't have to. And so another very special group in our domestic violence council is the Teen Dating Violence Subcommittee. And we are making a concerted effort to get into the schools, to get into the high schools, and working with young adults at our community colleges, in our neighborhood colleges to talk about this is what a healthy relationship looks like.
Yes.
Because many of these kids, these teens that are now starting in a relationship that are involved in domestic violence, almost, and I don't want to say all of them, but a good majority of them were children growing up watching domestic violence, being victims of domestic violence from their parents, or, you know, mom and boyfriend, or dad and girlfriend. They grew up watching and think that this is the way a relationship functions, or this is the way you show love. And so we're making just this huge effort via that committee to get into schools, to develop these, you know, more in you know, webinars and more in kid speak, if you will, you know, via text and just links that show what a healthy relationship looks like, that it does not encompass violence. And there are other ways to deal with your stressors when they come, because we're all going to be stressed at one time or another, and we're all going to have these triggers. But how do you navigate those triggers without violence? And so that is one thing that we're definitely making an effort to educate.
Thank you so much for that. We're very pressed for time, but I feel like I would be remiss to not give you a moment. Someone asked about immigration and non-citizen status. And I know I heard you say that immigration will not be called. And I still had the response of, I know your intention. I know maybe even that's the law, but certainly, you know, I serve a community in Escondido where, true or untrue, the perception that the local police are working with immigration and customs enforcement is strong, and it will take a lot to overcome that. So I wonder if you want to comment on that briefly.
Of course, and that is a perception, and I'm here to say no, because I review, you know, police reports, and in our unit we review police reports, and we're looking and we work with our police agencies, which they do not ask for citizenship status. You know, that is not a question when they're asking for data and information. That does not equate into anything, you know, that we do. We help victims no matter who they are. And definitely anybody that wants more information about immigration, definitely tune in to our next general meeting. It's always the third Tuesday of the month of March, where we will have an immigration attorney on there to talk about the realities as it relates to domestic violence, not only what law enforcement can and cannot do, but also, you know, there are mechanisms to help victims via U visas and other ways that domestic violence can get help that need, you know, documented. But yes, the perception is there that I don't want to call law enforcement because I'm going to be deported. And that's one thing that via education, we're going to be out there that say no, you know, that's not a factor at all. You know, victims should call 911 and not be afraid for, you know, consequences, because that, again, that is something that does not play into this equation as far as getting help and getting services for abuse.
Well, thank you so much, Assistant District Attorney Grasso and Reverend Dr. Parker. Before we transition to our breakout group discussions, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we have some representatives from a few of our elected officials who joined us this morning. And so I just want to mention them as well. I saw Caitlin Willoughby is here from San Diego City Council Member Joe LaCava's office, and Brenda Lugo as well from San Diego City Council Member Stephen Whitburn's office from Districts 1 and 3 respectively. So many thanks to both of you for joining and being here to represent your offices, and hopefully taking some of our conversation, information, and resources back to your council members and to your constituents as well. We're really fortunate this morning to have with us 5 organizations for our breakout groups, and we tried to put them into a rough geographic, organize them geographically so that you could see and hopefully connect with an organization that's close to you, where you live, close to your faith community. And so you can see them now in the chat box, so I won't read them all to you again, but you'll be invited to join any of these 5 breakout groups that you would like to go and learn more about the organization, what they do. And we've also asked specifically all of our speakers to address specifically how you and your faith community can get involved in supporting them, supporting their work, supporting the survivors of domestic abuse. So we've asked them to be really specific about ways that you can plug in and connect to. That's one of the things that we'll ask everyone to share out when we come back together at the very end of our gathering. So I guess I will actually read them out just so you can hear them. But we have North County Lifeline from the North County coastal area, and Alberta Saavedra from there. We have Cleo Spencer from the Center for Community Solutions in Escondido, Marcy Miller from South Bay Community Services, Maria Garcia from El Nido, and Patricia Zamora from Crisis House in El Cajon. So we're very happy. Thanks to the 5 of them for being here with us. And so now you have the opportunity to join whatever breakout group is closest to you or you want to connect with.
For showing out. I think this is such a relevant topic, probably more so now, but we know it crosses all generations. And so what I would like to do is just get everyone an opportunity to discuss what they talked about in the breakout rooms. So if we can get like a representative from, let's see, which one of those breakout rooms, anyone that's feeling really excited and wanting to share, feel free just to raise your hand. That would, oh, Tom, yes, go for it.
Well, I want to thank you. I've been here in San Diego for over 11 years and deeply involved in the community, predominantly the prison ministry that I've been doing, but that has touched domestic violence a lot. And hearing about the services that South Bay community provides as an umbrella is such a powerful lesson this morning. So I so look forward to gaining the hard copies, if you will, of what our wonderful presenter shared, and share that with other members of clergy who may not have that resource at their fingertips.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for sharing. And I agree, I was very impressed. And Marcy, did you want to kind of share some of that big umbrella wraparound services, just as a quick highlight?
Sure. That was the fastest I've ever been asked to kind of give any information. I didn't even get through a quarter of it. So I would be happy if any of you work with folks in the South Bay, or you're down in the South Bay and you would like me to give a bigger presentation, or you have a meeting where you would like me to give a presentation specifically, I'd be more than happy to do that. We operate a 24/7 crisis hotline. We respond directly to law enforcement in the southern region. When there's domestic violence. We have a emergency shelter for survivors with minor children. We have a transitional housing program. We have a therapeutic preschool for kiddos 4 and over if they need intensive case management and counseling services. We have daytime advocates stationed at the Chula Vista Police Department who can help with counseling. We operate a therapeutic program for survivors and their children. And then our hotline is 24/7. So if you have somebody actively fleeing domestic violence, they can call that number to connect with an advocate day or night and really get that in-time support and the resources and the connections to where they need to go, the safety planning, the stabilization services. We operate a food pantry, different rental assistance programs for folks who are fleeing and needing to get into their own place. And it doesn't have to be South Bay residents. Like I was sharing, you know, we kind of try to avoid putting anybody into shelter who's specifically right around our shelters. And I use the Chula Vista Police Department as a guide, but we will work to get someone where they need to go. So connecting them, we're part of the Shelter Collaborative. So we can, you know, call on our partners to really get folks to where they need to go to kind of help them in their journey. And we attend the San Diego Domestic Violence Council meetings, as well as I'm on the Teen Dating Violence Subcommittee, and I give presentations on healthy relationships to San Diego agencies who need that. So we're all over the place, lots going on, lots we can help folks with. And you guys can definitely give me a call anytime if you have somebody, or shoot me an email if you have a survivor who needs immediate services. We're always happy to help.
Thank you so much, Marcy. And the resources are going to be very valuable. The next representation I would like to hear from is North County Lifeline. Is there a speaker representation that would like to kind of report back, like in a quick 1 minute, of some of the highlights that was shared in your breakout room? Would that be you, Brother Yusuf, or is there, or your?
Yes, I can do that. Our breakout room was North County Lifeline with Alberta Savadra. And the things that really touched on me was that before COVID, it was mostly misdemeanor clients. And then during COVID, you know, everybody's sheltering in place and they have more felony clients, an increase of felony clients. The batterers, the topic was about the batterer side of domestic violence, and we don't hear a lot about that. What's going on with the perpetrators? They have to attend a 2-hour per week, 52-week course with North County Lifeline, and they're normally mandated. They provide them with education, make sure they understand the different types of abuse. A lot of them don't identify as being abuser because they don't really understand what they did wrong, especially if there's no violence involved. So North County Lifeline, they educate them on the different types of abuse that goes on. There's a wide spectrum, and they have a wide spectrum of clients. There's no one typical type of client, although there are certain precursors that makes, that enhances the event that comes about with domestic violence. They also provide wraparound services to mitigate some of those events. So with training, financial literacy, things like this, emotional literacy, relationship building, those kind of things to neutralize the precursors that take them to domestic violence. So the therapy that is used is a non-punitive type of approach to make it more digestible, make it more useful to the client, and in the delivery process is far better that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
If I may tag on just one more thing to what Yusuf said. What was interesting to me is that the Lifeline organization, even though folks get mandated to them for services by a jurisdiction, they are not paid by that jurisdiction to provide those services. So even though a court may mandate them getting therapy there, the court's not paying for it. So that was an interesting aspect.
Thank you, Mo. And I appreciate hearing the different perspective from the perpetrator as well as the resources we heard before. Next, I would like to see if anyone from Center for Community Solutions, I think that might have been Kelly or anyone from your group.
Sure, I'm going to defer to Cleo in just a second, but I just want to say as a listener, what I took away from that, and I think our group, was that Cleo presented that CCS listens to what is needed by the person, because they don't always know the person coming into their building what kind of solution they need to their problem. So they listen to what that is. They can't just say, oh, you need counseling or you need this. They listen to what the need is. That people, the takeaway also is that people are not always ready to talk. So you have to be, presented with that. And then also her colleague Susie shared that places like CCS are also always in need of like new items. So if a domestic violence a victim comes in to the center and needs, clothing or things like that. But I would rather have Cleo present real quick their resources and their hotline, like I think it was Marcy did for the other one.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your observations. And so Cleo, if you can give us like a really quick overview of the information you shared. I know we're getting close in time, but this is really good, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I just, Susie, my colleague, just dropped in the chat our emails, and I also just dropped in our info card, which has our hotline information and all of our services listed on it. I think that just to add on to what Kelly was saying, we have a lot of different services that are available. And one of the things that we think is really helpful for you all to take away from this conversation is working with youth and trying to engage in those preventative conversations about what are healthy relationships. I think that I'm seeing that conversation in the chat about how we can really address, prevention. And we do a lot of work in that area. And I really would support you all in finding ways to engage with your youth and your community about preventing violence.
Thank you so much, Cleo. I appreciate even you sharing a little information about the youth. This has been a really good synopsis of all the breakout rooms. Next is we would like to hear from El Nido Interfaith Shelter Network. Rosemary, I believe that might have been your group, or if someone in your group would like to report that.
Is Maria still on the call? Maria Garcia? I'm not sure.
She's there. I think you're on mute, yes. Maria.
So
yes,
Maria,
I'm here.
Yeah, explained the qualifications and the program, the case plan that they develop with each of their participants, and how each of the 11 apartment units has been adopted by a local congregation, and that congregation helps furnish the apartment before a new resident arrives, and including dishes, silverware, glasses, a full refrigerator of food and a pantry full of food. And then when that family moves out, they're allowed to take all the furniture with them, except for obviously the refrigerator and the stove. So these women, when they're ready to leave, they don't have to worry so much about, oh, now I have to start a new household from scratch, and that they also have to save part of their income for savings, and a third of their income, whether it's from public assistance or from work that they have, they pay toward rent. And that helps them practice for real life budgeting, so they don't get a shock when they get out in their own apartment and then all of a sudden they're paying rent and utilities and internet and all that stuff. That they do learn how to budget. The other thing she emphasized, I think can't be overstated, is the importance of site confidentiality, so that the abuser does not know where she and the children are. And there's a number of steps that El Nido takes with each of its new clients to emphasize that. And they don't receive mail at the site. They're not supposed to be picked up or dropped off in front of the project. And that all the mail goes to a PO box that staff picks up daily and distributes. So and I know they have a way to, when someone comes to the front gate, to get a channel on their TV and see who it is before they let them in. So that's very important at all of these programs, I think.
Thank you so much for providing that read back, Rosemary. We have 2 minutes left, everyone. And so in consideration of time, the Crisis House, Daniel, if you identify anyone from your group that would like to read back and let us know the information and resources that was shared, that would be very nice.
Yeah, I forgot to ask for a volunteer, but does anybody want to recap what we talked about? Or I'm happy to give a real quick summary. Pat from Crisis House, when we asked about specific ways that the folks in our breakout could support her and support Crisis House and the individuals that they work with, she had some, really simple ideas of like, we need diapers, we need toiletries, we need health hygiene kits, we need those types of things. We need prayers. She said, the power of prayer for them, for the people they're working with and supporting. She said, if you know of available housing units, it can be really hard to find landlords who are willing to, to rent to individuals. And so, if you have a granny flat, if anybody in your congregation has a granny flat or an extra unit somewhere, great to connect those opportunities to them. And also just, at a more macro level, supporting policy initiatives that support affordable housing. And so going to the really, the really big level of how can you support things, that affect the institutions and sort of the environment overall. So thank you to Pat.
Great. And so Daniel, did you want to go ahead and close us out or?
Sure, I can. Did we get everybody? Did we get all 5 groups?
We got all 5 groups.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Sonia. Well, thank you all so much for being here with us. I know we're almost at the end, or we are at the end now at 12 noon. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Thanks to all of our breakout speakers and our keynote speakers for taking time to share your work, your experience, and your resources with us. Our hope at SDRIC is that out of today's gathering, lots of folks have gotten some new information. They've gotten some inspiration too from what people are doing. And they've got some ideas about how they, in their personal lives, in their faith communities, in their work, can take action and really work to help stop this problem, the scourge of domestic abuse, including domestic violence, family violence. And so we will be following up with everybody to hear hopefully how you're taking this morning's gathering and putting it into action. And so look for future communications from SDRIC, including a follow-up email that'll have an evaluation, so you can give us some feedback about today, and also a whole lot of attachments to the resources that were mentioned from Reverend Dr. Parker and Assistant DA Grasso and others. So please stay tuned for that email. Check your junk folders or keep your eyes out for it. We do want to hear back from you very soon. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there, and many blessings.